let's finish our discussion of modified duty. And where is my pen? Oh, there it is. Yeah, this should be a pretty short video. We just have a few more points that I want to address on the subject of modified duty. And you can't see it in my desk is a mess. I got stuff falling off everywhere. That was something just fell. That's what you were hearing there. But like I was saying, just a few more points to cover on the subject of modified duty programs. Again, modified duty programs are important for companies that want to save money and want to do what's best for the worker and the company. The last thing we covered in the previous video was the importance of job descriptions and how job descriptions could help determine or help guide the types of modified duty a worker might be able to perform if they were injured. What I have here is a hypothetical injury, and then I want to, and this is one of those topics where I miss having face-to-face classes where we can have discussion, because usually I would throw out this scenario and then I would ask the class this question: what are some modified duty tasks that the crane operator might be able to perform? And usually the class does really well at coming up with different ideas, different things they could do that would allow them to continue to work but stay within their restrictions. So let me just read this hypothetical scenario to you, and we'll go from here. A crane operator injures his ankle, is on crutches, and cannot climb in and out of the machine. The company can provide him with a four-wheeler for travel on job sites. Frog in my throat. Sorry for the interruption there. The company can provide him with a four-wheeler for travel on job sites, and he is still able to drive a highway vehicle. What are some modified duty tasks he or she could perform? And I do want to emphasize she, because there's a lot of good crane operators out there who are women. Women can make some great crane operators. But what are some different types of tasks they can perform? They're on crutches. They are limited in their ability to climb, so they can't run the crane. But what are some other things they could do? They could answer phones. So a lot of crane operators are not going to like answering phones, but that's not all there is. But that's something they could do. In some businesses, there's a lot of phone traffic, a lot of phone communication. You could put them at the information desk answering phones. But if you do that, be careful with crane operators. Some of them can have some very colorful language, and they may not be the best representative for the company. They could do filing or other types of clerical work. Again, something they're probably not going to like to do, but they could do. There's a job there, possibly. Reviewing work plans. Now, this is getting a little bit closer to what they may not complain too much about doing. When we talk about work plans in the construction world, depending on the company you're working for, at Kiewit we use the term work plan. A work plan was just step by step what we're going to do today, how we're going to accomplish it, what materials are needed, what tools are needed. It's just a plan for a task that would be performed on a given day. Now, some of the work plans will cover more than one day, but it's a planning task. And normally the general superintendent will review the work plan for each crew, but you could have the crane operator. Usually your crane operator is going to have enough understanding of the operation to be able to help with that. Now, this is even better though. If there are any critical lifts that are going to occur in the next 2, 3, 4 weeks, you could have the crane operator help the engineers develop the critical lift plans. I say help the engineers or the safety manager or the project manager, whoever normally does the critical lift plans, they could assist that person. And when I did lift plans, I always included a crane operator because I wanted their perspective on the lift. And when we talk about a critical lift, we're talking about those types of lifts that you would do with the crane, where they are the hazards are a little bit greater. Maybe you're doing a lift close to overhead power lines. Maybe you're doing a lift adjacent to a highway, and you sure don't want to drop anything on the highway and kill people that are traveling up and down the highway. Or maybe it's a critical lift because what you're lifting is a very expensive item. Maybe you're lifting a multi-million-dollar item on that particular lift, and if you drop it, that's a bad day for everybody. So you want to make sure you do everything right. So that would be a critical lift. Then the other scenario that might be considered a critical lift is when the weight of the load is close to the maximum load limit, or the working load limit for that crane. Also a critical lift. But crane operator's perfect for this, and they don't need to be able to walk to do it. So they could be on crutches, they could be in a wheelchair, and help with critical lift plans. Cranes have to be inspected annually. They have to have a thorough inspection each year. And the best practice is to have a third-party inspector come in and recertify the cranes each year. There's a lot of clerical work, a lot of calling, a lot of emailing that goes along with this. If you use third-party inspectors, somebody has to call the third-party inspector and set up a date. Then they have to meet the inspector on that day to do the inspection on this crane or that crane. The crane operator who's injured could help set all this stuff up, and maybe even actually meet the inspector on the day of the inspection and help with that process. They could supervise, monitor, and train new crane operators. He could sit in his four-wheeler with a walkie-talkie and give assistance to the new crane operator. Maybe you got a crane operator with only a year or two experience, and you put a guy with 20 years experience with that new guy. The new crane operator can learn so much. It can be so valuable having someone like that. Certainly they could do that. Lightning monitor. And some of you are probably rolling your eyes now. Why in the hell would you need a lightning monitor? Well, if you're working up in the mountains in Colorado where there's a thunderstorm every afternoon and you're working 10,000 feet up and you have guys exposed to lightning, that's a significant safety issue. And when we were up in the mountains with Kiewit on those types of jobs like I just described, we would have, it wouldn't be just, the person wouldn't just be sitting at the desk looking at the radar to warn us about when lightning was in the area, but that would be one of their responsibilities. We would have someone each day responsible for monitoring the radar and warning the job site when lightning was within 6 miles. That was the Kiewit policy. Lightning's within 6 miles, you shut everything down because you don't want to get somebody struck by lightning. Supervise the rigging for critical lifts, or just rigging in general. When we talk about rigging can be a noun or a verb. Rigging is the process of attaching a load to a crane. Rigging is also the equipment that's used to attach a load to a crane. And there's a lot that goes into it. And there's, depending on what you're lifting, there can be a lot of engineering and calculations that are a part of it. Then once you have your rigging plan, which the crane operator could help with the rigging plans, then somebody should be there to supervise the rigging as it actually takes place. Doing rigging inspections, the chains and the wire rope and the shackles and the D-rings and all the different components. Another light duty or modified duty job would be keeping an inventory of materials. Materials on the job site or in the shop. Order materials that are needed. Help the project manager or whoever's responsible for maintaining the inventory, making sure we have the materials we need when we need them, and making sure that we have the right tools and the right equipment on the job site when it's needed. and other types of inspections as well. Again, coming from the safety perspective, I'm going to try to use this crane operator to help me out, keep him busy doing something productive, and help me out by inspecting extension cords, inspecting tools, inspecting fall protection gear, and so on. He or she could also help with help around the shop. He could be a parts runner. The mechanic needs a part for the dozer. Well, he can run into town and get the part, or which in some locations, just going to get a part can be a full day adventure. So that would be a valuable role that the injured crane operator could perform. Again, he can drive or she can drive. They're in a cast or they're on crutches with an injured ankle, but they can still drive the company vehicle. So that would be a good way to use them and keep them in a role that contributes to the health of the company, the well-being of the company. Now, whatever job they end up performing, somebody needs to be supervising them. There needs to be a frontline supervisor that's responsible for monitoring what they do and ensuring that they are following their restrictions. If they have a lifting restriction, somebody needs to make sure that they're not exceeding that restriction. If the lifting restriction is 15 pounds, somebody needs to kind of keep an eye on them to make sure that they're not going to overdo it and re-injure themselves or delay the healing process. So it's not you don't just throw them out there and leave them alone, let them do this modified duty job. There needs to be supervision there. Supervision with the intent of monitoring what they do, making sure restrictions are followed. Now, this is that form we saw previously. Talk a little bit more about work release. I said before that I like having something in writing that has the action. Something like if the worker's going back to work on November 21st, I like to have something signed on November 20th saying that they are good to go, they're safe, they're back to full capability, they can return to full duty on November 21st. And this kind of form can be used to provide that work release. Now, it's not absolutely necessary you have an additional work release, but I think it's best practice and some companies require it. This is one example of a form that could be used as a work release. Here's another example, or another return to work form. And here is an example of a form that companies should use to make a written offer for modified duty. This is a best practice. A written work offer or job offer for modified duty that takes into account the restrictions prescribed by the medical professional. A lot of companies don't do this, but again, I think it's a good idea. When let's say you have a crane operator that can't operate the crane, you have him doing something else, you give him a return to work offer, a modified duty offer. Here's what you're going to be doing. We know you have these restrictions, and this job should not exceed those restrictions. And if you do this, and there's going to be some employees that refuse the alternative assignment. If they don't want a modified duty assignment, and they might even say, "Oh, just send me home. I don't want to do this." Well, if they refuse this offer of modified duty, that could be grounds for contesting the claim or even terminating the injured employee. If the doctor says they can do X, Y, and Z, but they refuse to do X, Y, and Z, then that could be they could be in termination territory at that point. But when matters like that come up, we want to have attorneys involved. We don't make that decision. The owner of the company should make that decision without first consulting attorneys, because if a situation like this is handled incorrectly, it could bite us in the butt if we're not handling it correctly. But probably at some point in your career, you'll see this happen where the company makes a modified duty offer to an injured employee. the employee says, I don't want any part of it. I don't want to do that. Just send me home and let me collect my workers' comp. Well, they don't have that. If there's work for them and they want to stay with the company, they need to be more cooperative than that. But again, be careful handling that. However you respond as a manager, make sure that you have good legal grounds for making decisions in those circumstances. Modified duty could also be offered at a modified pay rate or a different pay rate. In my experience, most employers keep the injured worker at their normal pay level, but they don't have to. The one exception to this, in my experience, and I'm not going to name the company, it wasn't Kiewit, one of the other companies I worked for, we had an employee injured, and we offered him modified duty at a reduced pay rate. The reason we didn't offer him what he was normally paying was because we kind of wanted him to go away, and this was one way to kind of encouraging him to go away. Well, you normally make $25 an hour, but for this job that you're going to be doing, we're only paying you $10 an hour. And the worker ended up quitting because his pay was reduced. I mean, everything we did was legal, and attorneys were consulted to make sure that we were in good legal standing in that situation. And it really worked out pretty well for the company, at least. Let's see, what else can I say? I think I'm running out of words. Hopefully you'll find this beneficial once you're out there and working as a safety professional and dealing with workers' comp related issues. Now here's an example of a modified duty job description, which is also a good practice. You have the modified duty work offer, then you have the job description that takes into account the physical restrictions on the employee. Documentation in safety management is very important. Generally, the more documentation you have, the better positioned you will be legally if there is ever a lawsuit that comes along, and lawsuits will happen. If you're dealing with OSHA, if you have good documentation, that's half the battle with OSHA, is having good documentation. So if you don't like paperwork, paperwork's a big part, or having good, proper paperwork is part of safety management. Here's another document that you could incorporate into a modified duty return to work program. This is a modified duty sign-off sheet. By signing this, the employee is acknowledging that they followed all of their restrictions. My signature acknowledges that all restrictions concerning the modified duty job I have been working have been adhered to by myself and the ABC company. You would have them sign off on this each day. Day one, modified duty, signature, date they signed. Oh, actually, we have the date and the signatures. All we had. This is a doubled up form. To delineate this here, we have this is 1 day here, and this is 1 day here. But date it, sign it. When they sign it, they're saying they followed all the restrictions. This way, the worker can't come back later and say that they re-injured themselves, performing some type of task. Or if they're not healing up properly, they can't come back and say, well, it's because of the work you were having me do. When they sign this, they're saying that I did nothing on this day that exceeded the restrictions. Nothing on this day should cause my injury to be worse, or nothing on this day should delay the healing process. Related to workers' comp and work releases is another issue that I want to raise with you that you'll probably encounter. You're going to have workers who are injured away from work. Maybe they injured their back over the weekend. Maybe they were hauling hay. Maybe they were building a cabin and they injured their back. And they're not trying to, they don't want any workers' comp. They're not trying to file a fraudulent workers' comp claim. But they had this legitimate injury. Best practice, in my opinion, is to not let them come back to work until the doctor says it's safe for them to do the kind of job that they would normally do. They need a release from a doctor saying that it's okay for them to return to work. If you don't have that release, then you could possibly be in line for a lawsuit if they come back to work with this bad back that occurred off the job, and now they're working on your job. This bad back could turn into a workers' comp claim. So generally, it is a good idea to require a doctor's release when an employee has missed work because of a non-work related injury or illness. There needs to be a release, but it depends on the nature of the injury or the illness and the functional requirements of the position. Another reason to have them provide you with a release for an off-the-job injury or a non-work-related injury, they may be under the influence of medications that would make them unsafe to work around in a safety-sensitive environment. Certain tasks may cause the injury to worsen. What it comes down to here is if they are not fit to work because of this non-work related injury, the injury or illness may become a work-related injury or illness, and that's what we want to prevent. And having the doctor's release will help protect the company from a non-work related injury becoming a workers' comp case. That's what we want to avoid. Another thing, we can't have an unfit worker harm themselves or being a danger to other workers or the public. And that's what you could run into, especially if there's medication involved. A crane operator hurt his back over the weekend. He received some pain medication from his physician. Now he's out on the job and he's under the influence of that pain medication, hasn't told anybody about it, and he drops a beam on the highway and kills some people. We can't have things like that. Requiring them to provide us with a doctor's release is just another measure that companies can take to protect themselves from liability. But anything that's legal related or related to the law in any way, we should have attorneys involved. And don't take my advice as advice coming from an attorney. We should seek out attorneys anytime we're into any legal gray area where a company could be held liable in certain circumstances. All right, that's it for modified duty. Another fairly short unit, not as short as the last one, but still fairly short. Some final points, just a summary. The goal of modified duty is to get workers back to work as soon as possible. It's good for the employer, it's good for the worker. We need to work with medical providers to provide an effective modified duty program. We should have a written modified duty program or modified duty plan. It's a good idea to have job descriptions that show our physical requirements for each job. This can help with the assignment of modified duty. We need to make sure that the employees are following restrictions, and I think it's best practice, not absolutely required, it's not a law, but it's best practice to have a return to work document that's signed by a physician saying that it is safe for them to go back to work. All right, if you have any questions, let me know. I think that's it.